Good morning, everybody. I think we've given enough time for everybody to join that's going to be with us this morning. I hope everybody's having a great day. Today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the gut-brain connection. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat bar on the chat marker on the bottom. Send them over to me, and or at the end, I'll give some time for questions. So write down your thoughts and make sure that you have a chance to ask at the end. So the reason I wanted to talk about the gut-brain connection and just our intestines and biome in general is that it is absolutely very tightly associated with our ability to lose weight. It's also very closely associated with our ability to be healthy, to be well, to have a good mood, to have controlled cholesterol. It's a really important piece, and people in the industry oftentimes refer to that clear connection between the brain and the gut as actually recognizing that the GI tract is actually called our second brain. And just like we talk about reptilian brains, or anybody who's seen or been around when there's been a reptile killed, even though you take the head off, the body still continues to move. And that's part of that reptilian brain piece where the lower brain functions and spinal functions are actually in control of a lot of actions, irrespective of what the brain is doing. So, and or without a direct brain control. That's why you'll see sometimes a heart that leaves the body will still be beating for a bit, right? So, but the GI tract is actually called our second brain. And it's the interesting thing about our intestines, there are more bacteria and viruses in our intestines than we have cells in our own body. I kind of used to look at them as these passive passengers that would travel around. And as I've learned more and more about it, I've almost become to believe that we are actually the star, our body is actually the Starship Enterprise, and we're here at the behest of those bacteria, and they just send us places to get whatever they want. In our body, the vagus nerve is very, very important nerve that comes from the spine and from the brain, actually go down into the nervous system, and they attach to what we call enteric nerves, and those nerves give direct feedback to the brain. And so we have messages from the brain and messages to the brain, all going through these set areas. So the biome, what is the biome's effect on all of this? So when we look at the bacteria, the biome just refers to the bacteria that live in our gut and that milieu of all the different ones. But what bacteria are down there actually make a difference on what kind of messages are sent back to the brain. So it's kind of like they are in the Starship Enterprise sending messages back to the helm saying, Captain Kirk, we need to do this or that. The brain then sends messages back as to, okay, this is how we're going to do it. So your immune system is closely tied with that bacterial balance. And we have, like I said, we have billions of bacteria in our bowels, and they're not all the same strain. They're all different types. When we're born, we pass through our mother's birth canal, unless we're born by C-section. And when we do that, we're colonized, and our intestinal tract becomes colonized with the same bacterial balance that our mother has. They found that by having people or basically rats that are C-section delivered, they don't have that. Then in those studies, they were actually able to take bacteria from obese people as opposed to thin people, and they put the bacteria from those types of people into those animals, and then they put them back together. So brothers and sisters born by C-section, colonized with stool bacteria from obese and from thin people, raised in the same environment. Actually, the ones that were colonized with those from obese people were obese, and the ones that were colonized with those from thin people were thin. And so it just goes to show that the type of bacteria in our gut is really very closely tied to what's going on with what we absorb, how we absorb it, where we put it, and why we put it there. And there may be a day when we just clean out the whole immune system in the gut and we say, okay, let's start over and put all the right stuff in there. So it's all the stuff in thin people. And then we say, okay, good, we're going to be good to go. And then our body just says, oh, we're okay. And we let go of weight. So there will probably be a day when we start doing that. It's a whole paradigm shift in how we're looking at what we do for people, for their health, for their wellness, and also for weight control. Our immune system, 70% of our immune system is found in our gut. If I take every cell in my intestine, I lay it out flat on a sheet, it'll be about the size of a tennis court. It's hard to imagine, but we have folds in the bowel, and those folds in the bowel have folds on them, and those folds have little folds. So our body has found a very effective way to get a ton of surface area. So you can imagine it doesn't take a big area in our bowel to actually cause a big rift in our immune system and allowing things to get across our intestinal lining if we're not keeping those junctions sealed. Junctions are where we have those folds and our body keeps them tight, so it makes it hard for things to enter by that direction. Just like my skin keeps bacteria from entering my blood, but if I cut my skin or rub sandpaper on it, now bacteria that lives on my skin even can invade. So immune system, 70% of our immune system is there. There are tests that we have that can look at the immune system and how functional that is in the intestines. We look at IgA, IgM, and IgG. We also have response to histamine. We can get intestinal lining hives with or without hives on the outside. People can develop if we have overgrowth of yeast, we can also run into problems just like any woman who's ever had a vaginal yeast infection, or any men with groin itch or jock itch, understand that yeast can be very inflammatory. And even without symptoms, again, on the outside, we can have some of that inflammation going on the inside. So our immune system is regulated, 70% of it is in our gut, because we have such a vast amount of surface area that our body has to protect. And so just like our skin, we have immune system functioning to keep us healthy there. We also have it in our intestinal system. Your weight, there are actually chemicals in our intestines that alter our hunger. And many of you may be aware already of the GLP-1s. We hear about Ozempic and Wegovy, Mounjaro and Zepbound. Those GLP-1s, excuse me, the Mounjaro and Zepbound have one of those, the GLP-1, but they've added a GIP to it. There is another medication coming down the pike that has 3 different medicines that attack 3 different sites in our gut, or that effectively stimulate those 3 different portions of the gut. And so we're finding more and more areas in our intestines that actually help us decide, am I hungry or am I not? Do I need to eat now or do I not? And one of the important things is, when we developed, the world that we developed in did not always have a consistent feed of food. And so when the body would get food into it, it would say, okay, we've got food down here we're working on, so don't eat too fast, because our body didn't want to let the food get out the other end without being addressed. So we wanted to make sure that we hoarded all those calories. Well, if I'm working on calories, when I eat, my body says, okay, we have plenty down here, so it tells the stomach, don't empty too quickly. Well, that means when I eat, I get full quicker. And what food I have goes in more slowly. So it's almost as if I was nibbling over a longer period of time. And then the lower intestines don't push things along quite as quickly. So what we find is, by altering some of those chemicals without having to just tell my brain I'm not hungry, if I tell my intestines that I'm being fed, or give my brain the message that I would normally receive from my intestines saying, hey, we're full, we've got plenty of food, that's a different thing. It's easier to maintain that sense of fullness when our body thinks it's full than to tell the brain not to eat, because eventually the brain figures out this is not a great idea. It's part of why they've said in the past that some of those anti-obesity oral medications or appetite suppressants wouldn't or shouldn't be used long-term. Now, we do agree that they can and should be used long-term if people need them. But again, we've got brain signals, we've got gut signals that help regulate that weight. Diabetes, if there are some short chain fatty acids that if it is low, for example, butyrate, if that's low, our diabetes risk goes up. So sometimes just getting some of that small fatty acid back into the bowels and making sure we have bacteria that help regulate and process that, we can actually regulate and affect our tendency toward diabetes. Increased blood pressure and cause for vascular inflammation that increases the risk of plaque development. Again, when we have inflammatory problems going on in the bowels, it can cause all of those issues with increased blood pressure. So again, if we struggle with blood pressure, we need to also look back at the bowels, not just keep hitting at the vessels. If the bowels are allowing things to get across that bowel barrier that cause more vascular inflammation and disruption, that's why I check the HSCRP for people. If that's elevated, we may have a leaky gut that may be getting in, causing more vascular inflammation, which doesn't allow those vessels to expand when the heart pumps blood through it. And so if we're not letting that happen, that blood pressure goes up. Autoimmune disorders like MS or rheumatoid arthritis all have higher levels of Bacteroides fragilis in their gut. Those Bacteroides produce ubiquitin, which tricks the body into attacking itself. So one of the things we're looking at is what can we do about those Bacteroides fragilis in the gut? Can we overwhelm them? Can we eliminate them? Can we reduce that so the body stops recognizing self as something that it needs to attack, and our immune system can calm down because it doesn't have so many places to attack, and it can really direct its attention where it needs to be addressing it, viruses, bacteria, other things like that, as opposed to attacking ourselves. So again, lots of reasons that we've got all kinds of research looking at that whole axis. Last couple of things, Parkinson's, it begins in cells in the gut and travels to the brain via that vagus nerve. Alzheimer's disease, due to some bacteria producing more beta amyloid, which is linked to Alzheimer's. Those bacteria produce the amyloid. The other issue is we now call dementia in general type 3 diabetes, which again, we just talked about how diabetes and some of the butyrate issues can increase the risk of diabetes. And if we're having those issues, it may also increase the brain's risk of dementias. So studies show that our GI tract, like I said, is colonized by our mother's GI bacteria when we pass through the birth canal. And C-section babies, as I said, are not colonized with that bacteria. Over time, they will tend to be people that live in the same household tend to develop a similar type of GI bacterial balance. And some of the things that we used to say were genetic, your mom or your father or maybe both struggled with obesity, and we felt like when the person we're dealing with has obesity, that we thought that it was just a genetic piece, but maybe it's just that we're colonized with the same bacteria that they have in our intestines, which promotes that the obesity actions of bacteria and increase our tendency to store those calories, etc. Produce mood chemicals. So Coprococcus and Dialister and many other ones produce short chain fatty acids that we've talked about, some of those short chain fatty acids, but that affect or improve the mood. And actually our intestines are responsible for making more of our serotonin than we make for ourselves. Serotonin deficiencies are reasons why we take Prozac or any of that whole class of serotonin medications. But sometimes it's just that the bacteria that are supposed to be producing that for us have been wiped out by bacteria, have been wiped out by using antibiotics or by some type of intestinal infection that caused us to wash that out. So again, sometimes getting those types of bacteria introduced back into our bowels can increase our production of serotonin, which help our mood, energy, focus, concentration, quality of sleep, etc. Cognitive behavioral therapy and emotional brain training both help GI diseases. So again, it's a two-way street. So the brain affects the bowel and the bowel affects the brain. And so we do find that things like Crohn's, colitis, some of those other ones, when we do cognitive behavioral therapy or emotional brain training, which we have other sessions discussing those, but when we help the brain, we use those sometimes for people with PTSD, or people with high anxiety issues as well, severe depression. As people do better with those, their GI tract does better. And so if people struggle with irritable bowel or some of those things, we can actually make a difference by doing some of the therapy in the brain as opposed to just always addressing the intestines. Not all people have the same microbiomes in their intestines. Like I said, we're colonized by our mother and or colonized through the people that we associate with most or had households where we live. But those bacterial balances are hugely different. And so when we look at what are we going to do to try and repopulate the bowels with healthier bacteria, we want to look at, what types of things are we struggling with? Do we have elevated cholesterol? Let's use the bacteria that help keep that in check. Do we struggle with depression? Let's get more of those types of bacteria. Do we struggle with obesity or diabetes? Let's get more of the bacteria that help with that and overwhelm, or at least get rid of some of the bacteria that increase or enhance the tendency to have that. Microbes that we have can be healthy or unhealthy. The unhealthy ones are what we call dysbiotic, or dys meaning bad bacteria. And the bad bacteria actually harm our intestines as well as our health in general, because again, if we affect that intestinal barrier in a negative way, that adds inflammation, and the body and the brain read that as being under attack, puts the immune system on alarm, raises our cortisol, which again puts us back into stress mode. So what dysbiotic bacteria, what can they do? So actually they increase the risk of weight gain. They can cause Crohn's, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, inflammation throughout the whole body, as we talked about. So again, dysbiotic bacteria are a huge issue. And if people really struggle, there are labs that we can use where we send off stool and we colonize and we see what bacteria do people actually have, and see if they have overgrowth of certain bad types of bacteria, see if we need to address that, decreasing those and getting more of the healthy bacteria. And if that's ever something you guys are interested in, as you look at some of these pieces, let me know. It's not an inexpensive study, but it can be very valuable if people constantly struggle with bowel inflammation or bowel issues. So what do experts do for their gut health? So I always say, what do the gastrointestinal people do for their own health? And that's always a good sign. Whether or not we all do what we're supposed to do is another thing, but what do they do, and what do they suggest for their families to keep them healthy? And hopefully, what are they telling their patients to do? So number one, they know that fiber is a must. We talk about fiber. Fiber is carbohydrate that our body cannot digest. So there are fibers that nothing can digest, and it goes right through our system unaffected. We chew it up and we may get it into smaller pieces, but when it goes in, it goes out the same on the other end. Nothing can digest it. There is fiber, or there are carbohydrates we cannot digest, but the bacteria in our gut can. And so if we have healthy bacteria in our gut, we want to make sure that they are fed consistently so that we can help have a healthier balance and a healthier amount of that gut bacteria. And so adding fiber is important. If we have not been adding digestible fiber, or fiber that is digestible by the bacteria, if we add a whole bunch all at once, and or even if we just eat a bunch of carbohydrates and overwhelm that system, those bacteria go crazy. They have a heyday and have a big party. And many of those bacteria, when they digest that fiber that they're able to eat, they give off gas as a byproduct. So you will see sometimes people that eat a ton of vegetables struggle more with gas or bloat. And as well, if you add too much of that type of fiber all at once, you can get a very distended or uncomfortable abdomen. Increased flatus or belching can happen. So if you've not been on that or been on a very highly processed food diet, you'll want to add those things gradually over the course of a couple of weeks so that you don't go into that state. But adding those types of fibrous foods that the bacteria in our gut can digest actually helps feed those. When we grow healthier balance of bacteria in our gut, our body is also healthier. So fiber is absolutely a must. Some people talk about trying to eat a variety of at least 30 different vegetables and or fiber-based products every single week. So it's not a matter of just eating, all the same things over and over and over. That variety is the spice of life, as they say. But not only is it the spice of life, but it's bringing different types of nutrients when we add those different vegetables. Some people have trouble coming up with more than 10 types of vegetables. So again, it's something to work with our clinical educators on, trying to find what are some of the things I haven't thought about, and what other things could I add to my diet? What are some of the recipes that would give me ways to use that? And again, a great way to use our clinical educators. It's also fun to just kind of expand your palate and expand the repertoire of foods that you have and dishes that you make. So next thing, when you're rushing about the brain and the gut, don't fully get the message that you're full. When we are under emotional stress, we release adrenaline, and adrenaline gets us ready for that fight or flight reflex. And so when we're running on that fight or flight reflex constantly, and we're exercising, that I don't have time to sit down and rest, I'm going to eat on the go. When we have time to relax and allow the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the yang of the epinephrine or the adrenaline type system, when we let that parasympathetic rise, that parasympathetic nervous system increases the blood delivery to our gut, and we call that the rest and digest type of time. Well, if we're running on that adrenaline, it shuts down that parasympathetic piece, and adrenaline makes sure that we have less blood flow to the skin, more blood flow to the muscles, less blood flow to the intestines, and more to the heart and the brain, so that we are ready to run away if we need to. So the problem with that means is that when I eat, if I'm in that constant fight or flight mode, or if I'm in that rushing mode, I don't have time to sit down and do some mindful eating. I don't get the right messages, because I'm not, the gut is kind of shut down, or is in sleep mode, if you want to call it. And so we don't digest appropriately. The body is trying to work on it, but is trying to do it without the blood flow. And the things that we do, we don't appropriately digest and get those chemicals back into our body. So it is important to make sure, no matter what we have in our really very busy, rushing life, we need to look at, if you are constantly eating on the go, then we probably need to work on time management, or we need to work on your life plan, your life goals, and talk a lot more about that. The stress course that I run talks a lot about that, looking at how do I get myself into this situation where I'm constantly on the run. I don't have time to stop. I don't have time to eat. When you look at the people in Spain, it's interesting. They have 2.5 to 3 hours for their lunch in the middle of the day. They usually finish lunch sometime. They start sometime around 1 and will finish sometime around 4. That gives them plenty of time to do that, and then they go back. But those people usually don't eat dinner till about 10 o'clock at night. And so and then they slide their evening to the night. But again, that's in environments where it's very hot in the middle of the day. It's a good time to say, you know what, this is the time to go rest and digest. So try and make time to have some mindful time to sit down and eat. And just make sure that your brain is getting, and the brain and the gut are getting that right information. Remember, good bacteria doesn't just come from supplements, although we can look at the supplements if we're looking to try and get certain strains of bacteria increased. Just in general, when we eat fruits and vegetables, we're also bringing bacteria into our body with those. And so food in general can bring that to us. So one of the problems is that we have gotten to where we highly clean everything. It's all processed, and we're not always getting some of those bacteria out of the dirt. There's a woman who is in her 90s who attributes much of her health to the fact that she takes her carrots and her root vegetables straight from the garden, brushes off some of the dirt, and eats it as is. But she feels like she's keeping her immune system boosted, and there's all kinds of data on people that are making sure that they get more bacteria through natural processes, and looking at their immune systems, looking at how often do they get sick. When they get sick, do they stay sick as long? And there's definitely evidence to show that people that eat a less refined diet, eat more whole foods, and they have a better balance of bacteria in their intestines, and their immune systems are healthier. So again, another reason to get out of the things that come in a package and back into the vegetable and whole food sections of our grocery stores, and start taking advantage of that. Now, we're not going to be able to change what they've done on the outside with the bacteria, but again, getting all that wide balance of that. You can use this picture if you want to go into the recording after we're done, and you can see how many of these different fruits and vegetables you can actually identify what it is, and start counting how many of these things could be part of those 30 that I'm going to try and figure out how to incorporate in my diet. So again, we talked a little bit about when we rush and how our adrenaline system shuts down the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one that gets the blood to our bowels and helps with that rest and digest piece of it. One of the important things is to make meals mindful. So it's not just a matter of taking time to sit down and relax, but to actually take a bite, enjoy the taste, enjoy the consistency, think about the how it feels in your mouth, how it feels to chew it. Chewing and actually helping start part of the digestive process in our mouth rather than taking big bites, chewing a few times and leaving the rest of the digestion to our stomach. So make my meals mindful, enjoy it. And again, whenever possible, make sure that you've got someone to enjoy it with. So the other thing that can be helpful is doing a longer fast between dinner and breakfast. So some people talk about intermittent fasting and doing various times. Some people will have an 18-hour fast, which means that they only have 8 hours to eat. But again, most of us, and again, with that longer fast, if we do more of our calories first thing in the morning, because we've been not eating as much through the evening, and then we make sure that we eat a bigger breakfast, a little bit smaller lunch, and even smaller dinner. And so we're graduating down in that, and then we're going longer at night. That sometimes will increase or enhance the bowel's tendency to use those morning chemicals more appropriately. It helps keep our weight in better check. So I don't usually suggest more than a 12-hour fast at night. So again, if you eat at 7 o'clock at night, you can eat at 7 o'clock in the morning. For people that have unstable blood sugars at night, that can tend to propagate some unstable sleep, or can cause frequent awakenings, or nocturnal internally driven panic attacks, I don't suggest those 12-hour fasts. I do suggest some type of high protein, low carb, very low carb snack late in the evening, and some omegas at bedtime. So that's a little bit different, and that's a different situation. But again, when we do those longer fasts, the bacteria then will settle down, they'll use the calories they have, and then we feed them again. So it's that rest and digest piece that we're giving our body a longer time between those. So making sleep a priority. There's a whole separate section that was done by Lori Fitzgibbons, our PA, that it was just wonderful about sleep and the importance of sleep. But we rejuvenate our body, we replenish, and we heal and repair most of our systems at night while we're sleeping. So if we get poor quality sleep, or if we do not sleep enough at night, it absolutely affects our health. So the usual recommendation is at least 7.5 hours. At night, I usually suggest absolutely never less than 6.5 if we're trying to lose weight, preferably closer to 7 or 7.5 as a bare minimum, just because it absolutely puts our body into a state of stress. We don't heal and repair. Our body's adrenaline system then goes up because we're under stress. Cortisol goes up, which again puts us back into storage mode. It also, like I said, that rest and digest, it gives the bowels time to do what they're having to do without us having to be constantly pulling or drawing their resources of blood and oxygen from them. With sleep, one of the things that also I let people know is if you have difficulty falling asleep or difficulty staying asleep, it's really important that you work with your provider to understand what's going on, so that we can make sure that the quality of sleep that you get, as well as the duration of sleep, is maintained. And that's a really important piece with it. So cutting back on or reframing stress can be a game changer. If anybody has ever said that I had when they get a bad news, they get a gut reaction, or if you're expecting something or you see something happen, you get a visceral or a gut reaction to it. That actually happens again because the brain and the gut are communicating back and forth constantly. And that stress, as we've mentioned over and over again, when we're stressing, when we're running, the adrenaline system is on, the parasympathetic nervous system is down, and our intestines are not getting the blood flow, which allows it to be much easier for bad bacteria to invade, for things to get across that barrier that we don't want, and for inflammation to start on that bowel lining. So again, stress will absolutely be a game changer for the bowels. And we know that people can absolutely get those gut reactions. And that is one of those feelings where you just feel like all of the blood just leaves that gut and you get that rumbling or that roll in your stomach. So controlling stress, as we mentioned, using that cognitive behavioral therapy, emotional brain training, and or just mindfulness, meditation, any of those kind of things, bringing stress down. And even if you do 15 minutes twice a day, it can be a major difference in how the bowel's health is and how we feed that bacteria in the intestines to keep them healthy as well. So again, if you have more questions about that, we have the whole stress seminar that you can actually sign up for. So don't hesitate to do that. If you feel like stress is a big part of the interference with your general health, with your gut, with the biome, and or with your weight. So again, along with trying to decrease the stressful events in our lives, giving ourselves time to actually relax and enjoy, as they would say, take time to smell the flowers. Where is your happy place? Going to that spot, finding some time to get outdoors, finding it some time to just stop and gaze at clouds, finding some time to just be, to listen to the environment. Those kind of times, even 10 or 15 minutes, as we said, with trying to give yourself that relaxation time, if you can find some of those ways to chill, at least 15 minutes twice a day, 30 minutes once a day, it makes a big difference on our emotional, physical, as well as our intestinal health. And certainly from a weight loss perspective, makes a much bigger difference in making sure that we can lose weight. When people's stress levels go too high, weight loss plateaus happen. So again, find ways to chill, but more importantly, is it diving into one of your favorite books? Is it getting into a warm tub? Is it going outside and enjoying the breeze? So make sure that you've got that thought about what you like, vary it and mix it up, which makes it a lot of fun, but make sure that you're taking time to chill. And then making time for workouts. So the people say, well, how many hours in a day do I have? And if I do all these things, I'm not going to have time to do all the things I'm supposed to do, which means I have more stress. So again, find ways. If you find that you are way too busy, it's like, I don't have time to go to a gym. I don't have time to do that. Find times to do things while you're doing other things. While you're brushing your teeth, do some toe ups. While you're talking on the phone, go do a wall sit. If you're struggling with time, do some planks. They're a very short way to work on a lot of different muscles and to work on core strength. And you can do that in 2 or 3 minutes in the morning. So all of those things make a difference. Add some ankle weights that you wear throughout the day. Don't do that at the beginning. Wear them for maybe 30 minutes. Wear them while you're getting ready in the morning. Take them off and then head out the door. You've already worked your legs harder. Or put on some wrist weights while you're cooking or working. You don't have to specifically spend time at the gym to work out, but what you're trying to do with workouts is increase the intensity of work for your muscles. And it is really important to also get some increased intensity time for your heart. When we do aerobic exercise, fast walking or burst walks, or walking on a treadmill, doing some jazzercise, doing one of those things, what we're doing is we're increasing the rate that the heart works. And we want to do those in burst episodes. But when we do that, we increase our heart and our blood vessels' ability to respond when we need to run across the street to get out of the way of a rushing car, right? Or run away from the tiger. We need to be able to respond in those things with an abrupt change in heart rate and blood pressure so that we don't give ourselves a heart attack just trying to run across the street. And so making sure that you give yourself some of that aerobic time where you increase the intensity of the workouts. So times when you increase your breathing and your heart rate to where you're getting a 2 or 3 word sentence is important. But sometimes we can just do that with doing a couple of flights of stairs in the morning and then doing a couple of flights at night. I've got a flight of stairs here, and I will oftentimes go out and do 1 round of stairs at lunch, and then I come up the stairs in the morning, and then when I go down at night, sometimes I'll make a round and come and do it twice and then head out. Takes me another 2 minutes, but I haven't added tons of time. I didn't take 30 minutes to drive to a gym and then to get into my workout clothes and then do that. It's just a matter of giving yourself those changes. If your knees bother you, stairs are not a great way to do it. So find things that work for you. Remember, if you add ankle or wrist weights, only do it for a brief time and do not do it the next day. See how your muscles feel. If they're excessively sore, you did too much, do less the next time with less weight or less time. If they're not sore at all, then the next time you can certainly increase the duration. But some people will add it for a long time the first day, and that first day we feel great, but inflammation happens over 72 hours. So you're going to feel that exercise more 2 days later than you feel it at the time. And that there's a reason that our body does that for us. But so we can run away from the tiger when we have to, and we don't stop at that point, but we may pay for it and be sore the next day, right? So make sure that you're adding exercise in a smart way. Find ways to add it and bring it into your schedule rather than just making extra time for it if you already run a stress life. But that stress, that workout absolutely increases muscle, improves our muscles' use of blood, so that when we do have those demands and we pull from the gut, we can redirect it back to the gut more easily because we're not still stressing those muscles afterward. And so again, making sure that we keep good delivery of blood to the gut helps with that gut-brain connection. And when we're working out and decreasing that stress level, our parasympathetic level can come up and we can digest in a healthier way later on. So as we talked about, there is a gut-brain connection. We want to make sure that we understand that. If we are under a lot more stress, we shut down the bowels. If we are running and eating, we shut down the bowels. When we don't get good blood delivery to the bowels, bad bacteria have a chance to grow more and become more prolific, and they have a better chance of invading that bowel wall, allowing things to get across into the intestines that we don't want and through that intestinal barrier. That then causes more vascular inflammation, more cardiovascular disease. And we want to make sure we keep a good balance of the right bacteria. We live in an era when we've added a lot more antibiotics. Bowel bacteria balances are changed all the time. Adding foods that bring and supplements that bring us good bacteria and keeping a good amount of that so that we keep that dysbiotic or bad bacteria down is important. Making sure that we're exercising, being mindful when we eat, and making sure that we move often and sleep well, and set a good sleep habit is really critical. When we do all of those things, that gut-brain connection and our brain and our second brain make sure that our body is healthy, and it makes it much easier for them to do their job. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. And I'll go ahead and stop the recording now, and people can get on and ask questions if they have any questions. Thank you for joining us.